All right, it's the System Failure Podcast, number 84. Well, what's going on, Nate?
Well, hello, Brian. It has sure been a wild one this week. We have way too much to talk to, not enough time to get to it all, of course. But I think that the top thing on the agenda for this week has got to be the trade war, the tariffs, the wild swings on Wall Street. I don't know. How did you experience this week, Brian?
I guess I have a feeling of mostly vindication.
Vindication. Okay, good.
Well, I feel like what we did on the podcast was kind of we sold on the tariff hype, right? And so now it seems that, well, we are in a trade war with China, but here's what I found out from asking ChatGPT, right?
All right.
So there's now a 10% universal tariff on like every country, but then their reciprocal tariffs have been suspended for 90 days. Now, these 10% tariffs are a new thing that wasn't there before. And so it seems to me that Donald Trump has made like a Trumpian art of the deal style move wherein everyone kind of freaked out about the reciprocal tariffs, and now they're happy with just these universal 10% tariffs. And then there's the question of the trade war with China. But I was looking at the Wall Street Journal this morning, and, well, sentiment has kind of, ping-ponged, you might say, from freaking out to acceptance to, I don't know. It seems like it is doom and gloom on the Wall Street Journal this morning.
Yeah. On Saturday, the administration came out with an announcement that tech and certain chips and other tech stocks would be exempted from these tariffs, but it does seem like we're now in a full... now seems like we're in a confrontation just with China and not the rest of the world. Okay, well, I do feel like the Chinese are going to be in a spot of bother because they really depend on the domestic U.S. market, but they have known they can't depend on us forever, so they have been broadly expanding their portfolio. Just where I've been in the world in the past couple of years, South Africa and Serbia, obvious Chinese construction going on in terms of infrastructure, things like highways and ports.
Threatening that petrodollar.
Yes, yeah. So they've been they've been drawing down their collection of U.S. Treasuries. It's now about half what it once was at $750 billion, where they used to have $1.5 trillion in U.S. Treasuries. I think that treasuries or no treasuries, I do think that their exports depend heavily still on the U.S. market. So there's going to have to be some kind of negotiation there. And maybe the Donald can do something can rescue some of those dollars that are piling up over there in the form of treasuries that are the other side of the transactions from all that cheap junk coming across the Pacific to Long Beach. But I have to say, ping pong really, I think, describes the situation, because after this podcast last week, Brian, I went and bought some Nike. The market was in a state of collapse on Monday and Tuesday, and it was on Tuesday. I was like, all right, I think we're getting close to the bottom here, because our contention last week was that, well, this will blow over, markets will correct. The Donald's not clearly, he knows that threatening the volume of international trade, monkeying with that, clearly he's aware there's going to be a market backlash, so that cannot be lost. He can't be surprised by that.
Yeah. So you bought the dip. Bought some
Nike calls, and then I thought I was going to get rich on Wednesday when the Dow went up like 3,000 points, but then it's kind of fallen off since then. And I myself have ping-ponged. I'm now wondering if I'm wondering how much competence there really is with the Donald's administration here. I'm wondering if this is a competent or an incompetent rollout. And then I think there's also the other aspect of this is the international financial, community, the banking houses of the world, the people who really, the power behind the throne, so to speak, that have been so effective at controlling past administrations. Are they in control of the Donald's administration, or are they butting heads against it? Like, on the one hand, the Donald is, and everyone in his entire cabinet is in a lockstep on the Israeli thing, which is, suspect. But on the other hand, it does seem like the markets are just getting destroyed here. So I don't know. I'm wondering, is there something where the super rich are going to just make a killing off of whatever's happening here, and we'll just go back to normal after that? I don't know. I feel like I feel like my puts, my calls, which I bought when they were really, really cheap, when the markets were all depressed. I don't think my Nike calls are going to print. The contract expires on Thursday, but I think the markets are still going to be substantially. I only need Nike to get back to. I don't even need to get back to its lows that it was pre the tariff announcement. I just need it to get close to that. I just need it to rebound somewhat. I don't think it's going to do that. I think I'm going to remain unpaid this week. I don't know. It just doesn't. Is it the case that attack, like obviously the trade deficit and the budget deficit are related in the sense that we just keep having to send more and more of our monopoly money to China, and they send us more and more. I want to say Nike shoes, but I know Nike moved their production to Vietnam. But cheap junk from China. So yeah, I don't know. I do think that I guess I can't imagine that this is the end, and we're going to just see a catastrophic collapse from here on out. I understand rumors were flying on sites like TikTok that there'd be people you wouldn't be able to get your banks would close this week. You'd have your bank run situation. We do have a system of fractional reserve lending, which means the banks are all out there. The banks are out there creating this funny money, that like. This has been rattling around my head lately, and I'm not sure if it's illustrative of the situation or not, but I'll trot it out even though it's a half-baked notion of mine. Like, this bread is not fully baked through, but currently the federal debt sits at 37 trillion, let's say. 4.5 trillion of that is the dollars and coins that are in circulation, right? Physical currency. And then the remaining 32.5 trillion is treasuries. Those are the numbers that add up to get you the federal debt. So the point is that like the money that's in your bank account, the money that's in my bank account does not figure into this at all. Like the delta between what the government pays out and gives out in dollars versus what it takes back in taxes, that delta ought to be the money in circulation. But it's interesting that the real physical money in circulation plus the treasuries is what our national debt is. All of the bank deposits, right? The Federal Reserve System, the bank balance you think you have in your checking account, I have in my checking account, are all counterfeit dollars cooked up through fractional reserve lending. They're not real money at all. Not like the physical coins and dollars, which are then used, right? So you know that your bank cooks up funny money because you put $1,000 in the bank, right? And then someone comes and borrows that money. The bank loans them your $1,000. They don't draw down your account, right? Your account sits at $1,000, and that person now has $1,000 worth of bank credit. And that's what these bank deposits really are. They're just credit created by the banks in their computer system. It's not real money minted by the Treasury. So I think that understanding that the composition of the national debt helps us see why the Donald perceives China as a problem, the fact that they're just stacking up more and more and more of our funny money. And it also shows, the debt-based nature of our currency and the dangers of fractional reserve lending. It used to be before fractional reserve lending that you'd have to have some kind of a war, a famine, or a flood, or something like that to cause an economic recession. But now with fractional reserve lending, we get economic recessions completely untethered from any actual going on in the physical world, because you start looking to collect your debts and there's just not enough money in the system to cover all those bank deposits, and you end up with a Great Depression situation, as illustrated notably in that famous movie, It's a Wonderful Life. So all this is a rambling way of saying the problem we have here is that the problem with trade is that all of our money is just leaving, and we have to print more money to keep getting the cheap junk from China. But it undermines our key critical infrastructure here. Like, all of our factories have been moved overseas to take. But the real issue here, right? Like, Nike moved all their production to China to make their sneakers much more profitable, right? And the issue here is that they don't want to give back that profit margin. Now, Nike sneakers are not a strategic resource like semiconductors might be, but you can just see that the problem here is that we have just cut the expensive domestic workforce out of the loop, and this trade imbalance is just a way for the rich here at home to get richer. So the way to deal with our problems is by taxing the wealthy and gradually moving on to some more democratic system. In my view, taxing the wealthy to give us a longer runway so that the physical dollars are actually circulating where we need them to circulate. This is just the Keynesian idea of, because the rich have gotten so efficient in their rapacious nature, that the government's just going to have to keep seeding the poor with funds to give to the rich just to keep things rolling for a little while longer until we can figure out a more sustainable system. But I don't know, man. I don't think in the final analysis we're going to think of this as a master stroke of financial genius. I think that Donald will get some near-term concessions.
All right. Well, that was quite the critique.
Yeah, yes.
Well, obviously, the Donald's not solely responsible for the fractional reserve system. Yes. And then you're making these points about how that kind of undermines the integrity, or, you have recessions just apropos of nothing.
Yes, yeah.
And I think if you wanted to have like a society of harmony and peace, right? I mean, fractional reserve lending probably is antithetical to that, right?
Yes.
But suppose that like Bernie Sanders was the one in charge of the show and was like, well, we're going to have a trade war with China because we're getting murdered on these imports and we need to bring equity to America. I mean, that sounds like a good idea there, right?
It does not.
No?
I don't think Bernie would. See, I don't think that would be. I think that this is a way of trying to fix the growing wealth inequality, the grotesque wealth inequality in America that mirrors so perfectly the spiraling wealth inequality of the late Roman Empire. I think that this is we can't, we're the Republicans, we can't exactly soak the rich, which is exactly what needs to happen. It's what happened during the Great Depression to keep us going another couple generations. Needs to happen again, but that's not the Republican response. Like, I would think Bernie Sanders would do a more of a New Deal thing, right? Soak the rich with make them pay and introduce a bevy of new services that stimulate the economy. I think that putting the Cambodian sweatshops or the Vietnamese sweatshops out of business with tariffs to repatriate those kind of jobs back here, but then I just don't think I think that ultimately what I would be looking for is a way of like the solutions I would propose when I would think Bernie would propose. So maybe I'm wrong, but would be more things like a universal minimum wage. So we can't just do a labor arbitrage or democratic workplaces. So that labor arbitrage is just when you can pay a cheaper labor wage on foreign shores. So you fire your domestic workforce, right? If you said, well, all products sold in America, the workers must be paid X, Y, or Z. Well, then you would just remove that ability to offshore your labor force, and it would just make sneakers less profitable for Nike to sell. That's what I would want to chip away at Nike's profits. I would want to repatriate things in a way that chips away at Nike's profits, but not in a way that makes goods and services more expensive for the already cash-strapped American lower class, working and middle class. But
I'm sure that all the system failure listeners are simpatico with you, and that we'd all like to soak the rich.
Yeah, but we can't do that. There's no political will, so it's off the table. So now we got this other strategy instead.
Well, I mean, at least it's a strategy, right? It's not. It isn't just more selling out to China.
Well, that's really it. I mean, to me, that was really the big point I wanted to make on tariffs here. You've segued perfectly. Like, for me, someone who was mired in such ludicrous student loan debt that like the economy didn't make any sense at all, I guess I would rather have the snow globe shakeup effect of whatever the Donald's doing, even if it accelerates our collapse. Even if this ends in that would be better for someone who is such a financial loser, like I have been with my massive student loan debt. That it would virtually if we redistribute the chips, even if it's by blowing up the roulette table, just by the way of the explosion the chips are going to land. I mean, anything's got to be better than being in way more debt that you can never actually hope to pay off. So for me, I still am like, I wouldn't want like the corporate Democrats to just continue. Okay, well, we'll just continue just doing little things around the margins while wealth inequality explodes. Like, I would much rather have this wild card, this Mario Brothers question mark, than just being slowly strangled to death by Biden administration after Biden administration, where nothing really changes. So, I don't know. I remain overall optimistic, just not about my call options, which I fear will be expiring worthless on Thursday.
All right. Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know if I'm like supremely confident in Donald Trump. Bill Maher visited Donald Trump this week.
I had to watch the real time this week just to hear what Maher had to say. I assume you tuned in, Brian?
I listened to his soliloquy there.
Yeah.
And he said that Donald Trump did not seem like a crazy person in person.
He was very clear that it's like Boris Johnson, right? There's this persona that for whatever reason works, and then there's the Donald, totally separate person from that, which is a pretty interesting report to hear.
Well, the Donald does like capitalize on, I don't know, like just a lot of the critique from like the mainstream media ends up being like crazy things. Yeah. And I don't know, it's like the famous very fine people hoax, right? I mean,
to be more specific, that's the Charlottesville, Virginia march where, the Donald has all kinds of sound bites that would be fodder, like red meat to the lions for these corporate journalists, these corporate news outlets that want to smear him at every turn. But he was very clear in like the sentence before that. Like, I'm not trying to endorse white nationalists here. You know, I'm talking specifically, you know, he was just really qualified it well. But that's it. And then the other one is the P tapes, the Steele dossier, which turned out to be like totally fraudulent. You know, these things that when the media seizes on these things, and then they turn out to be like you're saying, they turn out to be false, and then the media looks discredited, and the Donald just keeps on going through the next scandal.
Well, I mean, I mostly follow the price of Bitcoin because that's what I'm invested in. And so, I mean, Bitcoin like kind of doubled in price when Donald Trump got elected, and now it's down like 20% from like 100K to 80K. So, I mean, the market is like down a bit here, but it did seem like that maybe there was going to be bank runs like people were saying on TikTok for a hot minute there. But I don't know, it seems like things are normalizing basically. And I don't know, I just don't really, I don't sense the panic in the air anymore.
Yeah. Well, the Donald, his skill is being the P.T. Barnum carnival barker type, the used car salesman type. So he must have some plan to make this look good. Even if he has no idea what he's doing with economics, I know that he knows showmanship. So I'm expecting some showmanship here, and maybe we can get that showmanship by Thursday, and my poor calls will be rescued from the abyss.
Well, there's still like a lot to be worried about. I mean, there's like these bombings in Yemen, and like, are we going to go to war with Iran? Yeah. And like, why are we deporting people who criticize Israel? That's all like really crazy. So there's still a lot not to like if you're in the hating Donald Trump camp.
Well, man, what I'd really just like to do is neither become a sycophant for the Donald nor backslide into the Donald derangement syndrome. Like, we're just trying to handicap it as best we can. But yeah, it'll be an interesting couple of weeks here. Hopefully this week. Hopefully it'll just be this week. But I'll be curious to see if the Donald can extricate himself from this mess. It seems like there's not been a mess so far that he cannot extricate himself from, and this mess is of his own genesis. So I don't know. I expect some showmanship flair, and then I expect wealth inequality to continue spiraling apace. I guess that's what I think. But who knows? Guessing the future, man, it's a fool's errand. I thought that our economy would collapse much. Like I thought that would happen in like 2017 after 2008 and all of our quantitative easing. So I don't know. What do I know, right?
Well, I think the American economy will continue on. I guess I still think buying the dip is where you want to be.
That's what I tried, but I may have shot my load prematurely here.
All right. Well, hopefully your Nike put works out somehow, and you make enough money to pay off your student loan debt.
Yeah. One final note on the bond madness, the tariff madness. I wanted to just bring up the bond market. Like, the thing that I'm watching is not really the stocks and not the price of Bitcoin, as you mentioned, but it's that yield on the 10-year T-note. I really think that is the best piece of metric that you can stare at.
And where's the 10-year T-note at?
Well, it started spiking on Wednesday. It's at around 4.5% right now. I think it's broadly considered that 5 would be a catastrophic level for it to reach. It's been down around 4, but at several periods during the Biden administration, it approached 5. Made us all nervous. The 10-year T-note, of course, is the yield, so it's the opposite of a price. So yields are going up, but that means bond prices are going down. In short, what's happening is Treasury is holding these bond auctions down in Washington, and people are not really wanting to buy the bonds. They're having to offer higher and higher prices to convince people to buy these 10-year T-notes. For me, I always think the end of the American empire will always be reckoned as the 2008 financial crisis. But it is theoretically possible for the Fed to hold a Treasury auction and have there be no bids, and a no bid in the Treasury auction would be the end of our currency, the end of our empire. It would just be financial chaos overnight. Banks, it would be the worst case nightmare. And the reason that we are so worried about bond rates going over 5% is that the yield on the 10-year T-note is considered what you're getting paid for a zero risk investment. This is supposed to be a zero risk, and so it's always the cheapest sort of thing you can buy. There's all of the other risky. When Disney or Bank of America wants to raise money, they don't go to the bank and beg for a loan. They issue bonds. So there's corporate debt, but it's a little more expensive. Even Disney, you would think would be they're very likely to pay their debt, but it's not 100%. So they're a little bit more expensive than treasuries, right? And then fly-by-night companies like the penny stocks that are on Wolf of Wall Street, those are more expensive, and And then there's other debt instruments you can invest in, like mortgage-backed securities that are somewhere in between. So it's essentially there's the debt market and the equity market, and they're stacked on top of each other like some multi-layer wedding cake. And the bottom layer is this 10-year T-note. And if that spikes too high, then it would not make sense to buy stock. Everyone would sell their stocks and just buy debt instead, because it's less of a risk to buy debt than it is to buy stocks. Stocks are more volatile than debt is, which are structured. So that was headed towards disaster, and that's why the Donald had to come out on Wednesday and lower all the other tariffs to 10% and just focus on this trade war with China. So it seems like the Donald's watching the bond markets too. Maybe I'm wrong. But that's where I think our intrepid system failure listeners should focus their attention during these trying and turbulent times.
All right.
The bond market.
All right. So the bond market says that so we're creeping up. What's the net change over like the past 2 weeks on the T-note then?
4 to 4.5%.
Okay.
That's ominous. You can see why the Donald was like, we got to do something here. He had to come out with a spot of showmanship to soothe the markets. So yeah, I expect more of that.
All right. I guess my prediction is that things just kind of cool off and we just settle into like this economic war with China. And I imagine we'll probably come to a deal rather than us both tariffing each other at like 125%, yeah. I guess is my prediction.
Yeah, I think the Donald might sense that the Chinese will be more desperate to avoid these tariffs than we are, and so maybe we can extract a little bit of a concession that's more in our favor and less in theirs, and maybe he could trot this out as a major victory, and then we can move on to the next exciting chapter in the Donald's second term.
Despite all the issues with the American economy, I think that China has a lot of issues as well. They also have like demographic problems and whatnot. Yeah. And so, I think we probably are in a good position in that way. Although it's kind of weird to think of myself as at odds with the Chinese government, and obviously, like I'm not at odds with the Chinese people. So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think. Look, the Chinese have played us like a fiddle thus far. They've been brilliant. People say things like the Chinese like to steal our technology. Well, first of all, that reminds me of Henry Cabot Lowell, the great American innovator in the textile industry, for whom Lowell, Massachusetts is named. You know the story, Brian. During the War of 1812, he was on his way back from England when the British Navy detained him in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and searched all of his persons, papers, and effects, trying to figure out how he was stealing the gear ratios for the power looms in the factories of Manchester, England. Well, our clever friend, Henry Cabot Lowell, wondering if he might fall into the hands of the British government, committed them all to his memory. And so there was nothing to convict him with. He brought all those gear ratios back to Massachusetts and set up a textile industry that for a while was quite the accomplishment. But then the other part of the story is the Chinese firms just made it. If you're going to have Chinese factories make your microchips, you're going to have to hand over the blueprints. They're not going to be able to make it without the blueprints, right? It's like, I don't. So, it does seem like the Chinese have been, eating our lunch for us for quite a while. In terms of trade, I feel like economic war is a fun war, in the sense that it's terrible if a factory closes, people go out of work, there's going to be deaths involved with that. But for the most part, it's like playing the game. It's just playing a Monopoly game with the Chinese and trying to find a strategy to gain the upper hand in trade. I mean, that seems fairly hard. What we don't want is anything harm coming to people, people not being able to afford their basics, or worse, militaries, mobilizing and terror, killing civilian populations. The horrors of war, we got to avoid that. But in a lot of ways, isn't a trade war? Can't you? I mean, in some ways, a trade war can become can flare up into a regular war. But also, when you have a big trade relationship, it makes you less likely to go to war. This is the theory after World War II. Right? If you make people into a trading partner, you're less likely to go into a devastating military conflict. So hopefully we can get some stability through economics. So I see that theory makes sense to me, I guess.
Countries with McDonald's don't go to war with each other.
That's exactly what I'm trying to say in so many words, Brian. Well put.
All right. Well, that was all some fascinating economic analysis there. Yeah.
Well, I suppose after the break, we're going to have to dive into the infamous Douglas Murray popping up in the JRE and debating our man Dave Smith. So I suppose after the break, we should dive into that, Brian?
All right. Sounds good.
See you in a second. And we're back. Well, alrighty, Brian. I guess it was pretty big deal in the podcastosphere. The erstwhile Douglas Murray, a longtime defender of the agenda of the State of Israel, finally debated our main man, Dave Smith, on the JRE, the biggest podcasting platform there is. First blush reactions?
Well, to me, this debate was like a showdown between like the experts versus the comedians just asking questions on Joe Rogan's podcast, right?
That's certainly how Murray wanted to frame it. Yeah.
And I guess my opinion is that this podcast precipitated directly as a result from Sam Harris, calling out Joe Rogan for having suboptimal or spreading misinformation on his podcast, I guess. And like not vetting what people are saying sufficiently in his estimation.
Yes, okay, that's quite the criticism. I am given to understand you've got the clip of Dr. Harris ready to go here, Brian?
Oh, yeah, let's fire it up.
Okay, let's do it.
Joe is a genuinely good guy who wants good things for people, but he is honestly in over his head on so many topics of great consequence, right? When he brings someone on to just shoot the shit about how the Holocaust is not what you think it was, right? And maybe Churchill's the bad guy in World War II.
Is that Tucker?
Or he's got Dave Smith, being treated as an expert on Israel and Palestine and the history of that conflict and the moral emergency that came to the world's attention on October 7th. And what is appropriate to think in the aftermath of all of that, right? Dave Smith is the only reason why anyone knows what Dave Smith thinks about any of this is very likely because Joe had him on multiple times to talk about it, right? He's a pure misinformation artist, and on top of many others. And when Joe talks to someone like Trump or Tucker Carlson or any of these other guys who lie as freely as they breathe, and doesn't push back against any of their lies. In fact, in Trump's case, really fairly energetically helped put his lies into the most plausible possible shape. It is irresponsible. I mean, it is directly harmful. Our society is as politically shattered as it is in part because of how Joe has interacted with information. Again, I don't think this is. I think a lot of this is inadvertent, or maybe all of it's inadvertent. But it is also avoidable. Right, he could actually take the responsibility that really is his to take at this point to get his facts straight and have someone other than Jamie there riding shotgun with him. Where he could have two brilliant journalists whose full-time job he could pay each of them $1 million a year just to sit there and make sure he doesn't put his foot in his mouth in a colossally irresponsible way.
All right. So, like, Sam Harris seems to be, like, directly criticizing Joe Rogan in particular for having, like, Daryl Cooper on, right? Who, he gets quoted out of context for talking about, like, Churchill. And, of course, like, we on this podcast have talked about, Danzig and Donsk. And, of course, if you ever listened to David Gilmour live from 2006 in Donsk and wondering why he's playing a great day for freedom, it has to do with the history of the city, which, of course, it was just like a German city that the rest of Poland is like, it was like under like Western influence or like French and British influence, right?
It's like a German city with like it was called Danzig for years, a German city with German population living there, but it was placed inside the borders of Poland by the unfortunate Treaty of Versailles in 1918.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that was like a source of contention in like Germany invading Danzig to try to reclaim it was like what kicked off World War II. And so basically the critique of Churchill, to my understanding, has to do with like Danzig, right?
Possibly a security guarantee to the Polish, and a subsequent declaration of war may not have been in all of Europe's best interest, is the argument here.
Yes.
Look, what you're going to hear, folks, ladies and gentlemen, through this whole section, the big theme is this. You're going to hear non-experts with a nuanced opinion say things like, well, look, World War II is a hideous situation. Millions of people met their end. And realistically, there's going to be blame on both sides. It's not to say that Churchill's worse than Hitler or that Hitler doesn't deserve criticism for genociding his own population. Just that there are off ramps that were declined on both sides. And similarly, you're going to hear this idea that everything that's going on in Israel is the fault of Hamas and not the fault of the Israeli state, when in reality, this is another atrocities on both sides situation. And when you have an atrocities on both sides situation, there's blame on both sides of the tennis net, right? But when you go to war, or when you base an entire culture like post-World War II America on these ideas as if they're like a mythological underpinnings, you have to paint one side as like a saint and one side as the devil, right? There can be no nuance, right? Hitler has to be 100% evil and 0% good, and Churchill has to be 100% good and 0% evil. This is the way that mythology works. All myth, like Luke Skywalker, 100% good, Darth Vader, 100% evil. But that is not how anything really works in the real world. And so you're going to hear Sam Harris not bring up an example of something Joe Rogan got wrong. You're just going to hear how dangerous it is that people aren't listening to the expert anymore, with not a tinge of irony, with not a tinge of irony or recognition of the fact that we live in a post-COVID world when the experts have been proven to be comically wrong and totally untrustworthy. To the point that when someone explains to me that they're an expert, I now wonder what else they're dealing with. Like that, it's not just that it's not good to be an expert. It's now bad to be an expert, in my view. So, yeah, we're going to hear Douglas Murray, Sam Harris, people that I used to admire so much, announce that no, what we need to do is maintain a simplistic mythological understanding of World War II, and we need to maintain a simplistic mythological understanding of what's going on in Gaza and Israel and the West Bank. And that it's dangerous. Not only is it dangerous, it's anti-Semitic to consider that maybe in a situation where there's atrocities on both sides, there's plenty of blame to go around. I mean,
well, yeah. The other critique of Daryl Cooper is he's being branded as like a Holocaust denier because he said that Hitler did not run on a platform of exterminating the Jews. And, I just looked it up on ChatGPT. And what ChatGPT said is that, in Mein Kampf, he does like blame the Jews, yeah. And he did ran on a platform of trying to close Jewish businesses and trying to get like Jews to leave the country. And then what ChatGPT said was that the final solution didn't come about until like 1941, mm-hmm. the policy of like exterminating the Jews, and that was like a secret policy. And so he really didn't run on a policy of exterminating the Jews. Now, he did run on a policy of taking businesses away from the Jews.
Pogroms and oppression versus extermination.
Yeah. So I don't know. So there is some nuance there, right? And to call Daryl Cooper a Holocaust denier over that is like completely crazy, right, in my estimation.
Yeah. We will once we've played all these clips, we'll get into some speculation about why it is these experts might really, really want us to have that might come before us with totally serious faces announcing that any sort of nuance in the World War II situation or in the Israeli situation is dangerous thinking. To be, we must make sure we don't engage in such dangerous thinking or platform anyone who would dare to think such a thing.
Well, I mean, we've thrown the name Rothschild around on this podcast and talked about Israel and the petrodollar, and so I don't know. I don't know if we sound like anti-Semites or something. But I guess my understanding about history is that people largely didn't care about the Jews after World War II, and that was a narrative that got applied much later. And so I don't know. Obviously, we don't support exterminating the Jews.
The problem is finance. It has always been finance. The New Testament has stories about Jesus championing the poor and throwing moneylenders out the Temple of Solomon. Right, Depression era. Folks who live the Depression, they know not to trust the banks. They keep their coins in jars in their mattress, right? They know that the banks are suspect. They lived through the It's a Wonderful Life bank run era. Finance is the problem. And just because of historical forces, sometimes Jewish people were involved in finance, sometimes not. But it doesn't matter. Whenever awful things happen, the person who did them probably has some religion, but that doesn't matter. This is entirely incidental. What's the problem here is the shadowy international banking houses. Who knows? Judaism is not at all a part of this equation. Judaism, anti-Semitism is the way that they try to shield those shadowy banking houses and keep them off the table of rational discussion. But no, this has nothing to do whatsoever with Judaism. It's all about compound interest, and fractional reserve banking. That is what we're here to criticize on the old System Failure podcast, Brian. People's religion it's not interesting when we're talking about this subject, unless you're trying not to talk about this subject, in which case suddenly anti-Semitism, very important thing to bring up.
I think we advocate for having a nuanced view of history too.
Yes, the mythological Luke Skywalker versus Darth Vader view of history is never appropriate. People are never that way. It's unfortunately it's Dale Cooper who brought this quote to my attention, but some historian had this quote that, if you're dealing with angels and demons, that may be very important work, but what you're not doing is dealing with history if you're dealing with angels and demons. It's a great quote, and exactly right. Well, I guess that brings us to Mr. Douglas Murray. Now, I would like our esteemed System Failure audience to keep in mind as these clips roll, Mr. Murray holds a bachelor's degree in English from Magdalen College, Cambridge. Was it Oxford? Is Magdalen College Cambridge or Oxford? Magdalen College. Anyway, the man has a bachelor's degree, so to hear him apparently regard himself as an expert, but not Dave Smith, is like the height of comedy. Literally, Brian, you have a bachelor's degree. You and Mr. Murray equally qualified to be talking Israel.
I don't have a snooty British accent. Although, I am going to say some things in favor of Douglas Murray as we get in here.
Not me. I'm thoroughly disgusted, but I'm glad that you are, Brian. That shows a even-handed attempt, right? I don't want to just demonize. He's not Luke Skywalker versus Darth Vader, but I was thoroughly nauseated. Just a brief sidebar. We were supposed to have a guest on this pod today, and when this Douglas Murray versus Dave Smith debate popped up on Spotify, I was excited. I was like, this is going to be some great pod. Listened to all 3 hours. Then within minutes of finishing the pod, I get a note from our podcast guest who canceled, which meant that I had to then go back and cut up. I had to go back and listen to it again. I was thinking to myself the first time through, this would be some great fodder for System Failure. It's too bad we have a guest. We just only have so much time. We cannot do everything. Only to find out the guest wasn't coming, and then I had to listen to Douglas Murray's obnoxious affect for 3 more hours while I chopped up the pod. So my kettle's boiling. Wow. Well, Brian, why don't you start us off, if you could, my good man, with clip numero uno.
I'm still slightly bemused about this move from I'm an expert on this and I have views to I'm a comedian.
I've never claimed to be an expert on anything.
This is the problem, Joe. I mean, if somebody
Wait a minute,
says
you have to claim to be an expert on something to have an opinion on something?
No, you don't have to be. You don't have to be. But
so
this is
the
like,
issue?
I'm not a historian, but I'm pumping out history.
But wait a minute,
I'm
what
not
about
an expert, but I'm talking all the time about
but
this
you're not
thing.
even talking about specifically on what he just said.
No, I'm saying, this is my point about this. You say, I'm not an expert.
So what's the solution? To not talk about it?
No, it's to have more experts around.
Well, the expert class hasn't done a great job.
I know.
Man. This is follow the science.
Yeah, but you know what? I agree with that. I just said to you, I agree with that.
Right, I know.
But
so
one
Douglas,
of the problems
during all of COVID, I will put my track record against any of the expert class on COVID. I'm glad to do that. So should I have just shut up? Should I have shut up by opposing lockdowns and opposing vaccine mandates and talking
that
about
was
the
the
lab
argument
theory?
at the time. You realize
that's the entire argument that you're making. Let the experts handle this.
No.
You're not an expert. You're right. I was just a comedian.
You're wildly not listening to what I'm saying. I think we should agree perhaps on the following, that one major thing can break down in front of your eyes, or many major things. And it does not mean that every single one of the sewer gates should be lifted. Okay?
What? Yeah, I get that point.
But
Right.
Who's saying it should be?
I'm saying this is the chatter on what is part of our side at the moment, is that a lot of the sewer gates are being lifted, sometimes by people who know that they're doing it, sometimes by people who don't, sometimes by people who say, I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there. But at the very least, there's some damn hygiene that should be required, isn't there?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, but sure.
Just that. Let's have a bit of hygiene on our own side, not lift every sewer gate.
And when you say our own side, you mean the right wing broadly speaking?
Broadly speaking, and I'm sort of funny about libertarians. I'm never quite sure. I always think I think libertarians are essentially the bisexuals of politics. They should just choose, Joe. They should choose. It's kind of, they just want everything at the buffet.
That's very funny.
Well, I think we want some things. I don't know. Okay, that's a weird way to put it, but I get
see your point.
All right. Well, I mean, I don't know. Look, I mean, essentially, I just don't. Maybe there's something I'm missing here. But if your argument is that, like, you're saying I claim to be an expert, but then I have like a parachute to get out of it by being like, hey, I'm just a comedian who's just saying this. Yeah. But I don't think I've ever like really claimed to be an expert. I have opinions on things.
I know, but
because I'm interested in these topics.
Yeah, I know. But isn't it weird to go around, for instance? I mean, let's get to the last year and a half. It's a bit weird to be simultaneously saying I'm not an expert on a conflict and talking about it everywhere.
I don't think so. Not really. Yeah. Huh. I mean, I don't know. I don't think like
I don't know.
I don't see how you.
Do you
have
talk
opinion
about
on
these things?
Which things?
All these things that we're talking about.
Some of them, yeah.
Are you an expert?
I am on some, yes.
On some,
but
but
you talk about some that you're not an expert on.
You'll notice
right, so
that
what should you do? What should you do if those subjects get breached?
Well, I think that you educate yourself as much as you
can. Should you say I'm not an expert and then give your opinion if you're in the middle of a conversation?
I think it's, as I say, I think that it's a weird move to say I'm not an expert on this, but I'm going to talk about it nonstop.
All right.
Brutal. There you have it. You just notice the way that Murray, he just there's a lot of sighing and groaning and writhing in his chair. He just hates that he has to come all the way down to Austin and talk to the bald-headed jiu-jitsu guy Joe Rogan and his comedian sidekick Dave Smith, and but except for he really needs to sell his book, so he has to come on this podcast and just so yeah, and just the way that he talks down, it just dribbles from his tongue. It's just awful the way that he just is like, yeah. Keeping in mind, this man is no more of an expert than either of the men he's sitting across the table with. He will not be engaging with any of Smith's points. In fact, on the very next clip, Smith lands the only punch he landed the entire podcast. Brian, if you would. But first of all, let's hear your comments on number one. Then we'll go to number two.
All right. Well, I think that, Dave Smith, he does say that, like, I'm not an expert, but then he goes to argue these points. I mean, he does act like he's an expert by going around on various shows and whatnot and, arguing these points. And I just don't really know why he's making this duck and weave move where he, makes points and then claims not to be an expert. But
does Smith do that? I don't think I've ever heard him.
Well, at the top of the podcast, or the top of the clip there, he's just saying, well, I'm not claiming to be an expert. He does it, like, right there. But Murray, like, never really does challenge Dave Smith on any of his points. And I feel like Dave Smith would welcome, a debate on, if he's getting something wrong. He seems like the kind of guy who would want to know what that thing is. So I think they should... I think he should just embrace the mantle of being an expert. I mean, I would agree he's gotten way more right than he's gotten wrong. And, fundamentally, the reason why people listen to Joe Rogan so much is because the experts have let us down. And the ultimate... Joe Rogan doesn't really need to do anything different. Like, what needs to happen is the experts need to stop being, like, corrupt shills, right?
So at the top of the pod, Smith was specifically defending himself against Murray, saying his opinions are invalid because he's not an expert, or he's responding to Murray accusing him of touting himself as an expert. That's when he never says I'm not an expert when it turns out he's got something wrong. He never uses it as the parachute to which he referred at the end of that clip. I've never heard Smith say, "Oh well, I might be wrong because I'm a comedian." There's a funny move that Daryl Smith and Dan Carlin do, where they announce
Dave Smith,
Daryl Cooper, and Dan Carlin. They both strenuously into the microphone every time I hear from them disclaim themselves as not being a historian. Okay, so there's
Dan Carlin does that.
Dan Carlin all the time. Yeah, I'm not a historian. I'm just a guy that tells because historian is a specific like legal qualification, right? Expert means something like in court or financially. If you're an expert, it means you can certify things, right? Expert, like no one we're hearing in this podcast is an expert. No one. Expert is like a binary. Either you are an expert in the sense that you have some credentials or you're not. But there's a spectrum of knowledge about a subject, right? You may have a lot of knowledge about a subject, but no certifications. Smith he's read a lot of books about this situation. He's got a lot of well-formed opinions, and he's good at picking apart the arguments that come his way that are facetious or fallacious in some, facetious is the one word, in some way or another. So I think that Smith, because he has read more books on the Palestinian situation than I have, is perfectly worth listening to. And I'll often check the things that he says by going online and seeing if it is in fact true what Smith is telling me. Like for example, when Smith says that Bibi Netanyahu came to Congress in 2003 to promote the war in Iraq and guarantee that we'd be welcomed as liberators and a democracy would break out in the region, and then I go back on YouTube and watch the actual video to clip for last week's show, everything is there, just as Smith indicated it would be. He's never failed me. So this idea of credentialization, I can't believe anyone would find that persuasive. I can't imagine anyone would think it would be a persuasive argument to lever in the years after the COVID fiasco when the experts just were like wrong again and again and again and again. I can't imagine. It doesn't matter whether Dave Smith is an expert in my mind. It matters whether he has read more than I have, and I can use his worldview to patch my own worldview if that's the case.
Right. Well, it's kind of the whole reason why the social fabric of our society is coming apart, because like credentialism sort of used to work, right? Yeah. And it's completely fallen apart in the information era here, right?
We live in this is Eric Weinstein's perennial point. We live in a fraudulent economy, right? For every law firm that's got 3 partners and that's got 3 partners and then like 9 associates, right? All 9 of those associates want to get one of the partner slots someday, but they can't all make it, right? So, just as a way of the people that become the people that are partners in successful law firms, part of being successful is keeping all 9 of your associates thinking that they're going to be partners one day, even though only 1 or 2 of them can be, right? So there's a problem that the pyramid we've just reached the limits of the growth of a pyramid scheme. And that's made all of our experts compromised, or it's made a lot of them compromised to where if someone announces they're an expert now, like that, is that a asset or is that a liability? To me, if someone announces they're an expert, that means they've gone through some credentialing process. That means the institution can get their grubby fingerprints all over them. Like, who knows what kind of influence this person who claims to be an expert has. Like, to me, being an expert is a major strike against and not at all, a strike for in this day and age.
Well, ultimately, like, being an expert is should be a credential that's applied to you by like the populace by demonstration of your expertise rather than something that's bestowed to you by some authority, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That's it.
And also, just as an aside, see, libertarian saying that's like a bisexual position is like backwards, because like libertarian is at least like logically consistent, and it's like Republicans are the bisexuals in that they they want to have like small government, except for like social issues where they want the government to get in there. And then the Democrats are the opposite. It's kind of changed over time, but like Democrats, they just don't even do the social things that they're supposed to, and then they're trying to get in there on other. Well, they're trying to get in there on social issues, but not actually do any like wealth redistribution. And they're also like the party of like big war now, apparently. And I mean, libertarian is at least like consistent, right?
Yeah, you're right. Both parties are schizophrenic in the sense that they have to attract big chunks of the regular working middle class. The Republicans, even though they're tax cut for the wealthy party, achieve that through their social issues. They get regular Joes into their tent through the social issues, Christians, whatever. Meanwhile, the Democrats, like their exact opposite problem. They're supposed to be, tax cut. They're supposed to raise taxes on the wealthy, but behind the scenes, they're actually on board with the neoliberal Reagan agenda of slashing taxes on the wealthy and trying to stimulate economic growth that way, even though it has never worked, will never work, does never work. So they have to pretend. So you've seen them also, graft onto some social issues that they think can be winners, because the economic policies for both parties are just an utter disaster, an utter dumpster fire. So that's an interesting observation about the schizophrenia of our two ridiculous major parties. Okay, so as mentioned in the next clip, number 2, Douglas Murray's going to land an actual punch on Davey Smith, the only one of the podcast by my reckoning. So let's take it away, Brian.
When were you last there at all?
I've never been.
You've never been?
Well, am I not allowed to talk about it now? Have you ever been to Nazi Germany? Are you allowed to have feelings about them?
You can't time travel, but you can. But you can travel.
Okay, but so what? So what's the point?
I find that
lots of people have been there and agree with me, and lots of people have been there and agree with you.
Yeah, but if you're going to spend a year and a half talking about a place, you should at least do the courtesy of visiting it.
All right. I just think this is a non-argument.
You don't think?
Okay. No, I think it's a non-argument.
But if you're an expert,
well, you have to go and touch the ground.
No, I think you have to see. I think it's a good idea to see stuff, particularly if you spend a career talking about something. Yes, I have a journalistic rule of trying never to talk about a country even in passing unless I've at least been there.
Okay.
It's a
But that's
sort of
not
normal, it's a normal thing to do. You're talking about, you're talking about crossing points. And not only have you never been to a crossing point in either Egypt or in Israel, but you've never even been to the region.
Okay. Again, I
How
think this is
can
a
you-
non-argument.
Hang
I
on,
don't understand.
No, it's not a non-argument.
Yeah, it is.
It's not a non-argument if you're insisting that you're an expert of some kind, or not claiming you're an expert, but still talking about it, about the provisions going into Gaza or not, if you've never seen any of this going on.
So you're not
That's
allowed to
amazing
speak
to
about
me.
things that you've read about. You can only speak about things that you've seen with your own eyes.
You can talk about what you want, as you're proving. But that is a different matter from spending an awfully long amount of time talking about an issue in a region you haven't even had the courtesy to visit, whilst developing all of these views about it. I mean, now I slightly get an idea of where you're coming from. You've read about this blockade, and so you imagine that that's what it is. I imagine you've read all the people who say that Gaza was a concentration camp, and you probably think that too.
I see. It's interesting. All right, I'm surprised you characterize this as like a punch landed on Dave Smith, because I don't think it's a very good one.
Well, of course not. It's just you could see Douglas Murray was like, finally, I've got something to get off Smith. Like he's spending this whole podcast talking about the importance of experts. He must be uncomfortably aware that he ain't an expert, and yet he goes around talking about this stuff nonstop. It's like you could just hear the condescension oozing from Murray's lips that he has to actually talk to Dave Smith, the dude from New York City. Oh yeah, it's interesting. For Mr. Smith, it's I didn't. It was just too long. I wanted to cut it off, but after another minute, Smith remembers in the back of his mind that Douglas Murray from Ukraine in like 2022 wrote this article about how all we had to do was keep funding Ukraine and the war was totally winnable. And so like, seems like you got it wrong from Ukraine itself, dude. There's no way. To your point, Brian, there's not the idea that you have to physically visit someplace to form an opinion on it. It's all Douglas Murray's got. You could just, he was, the rest of the pod, he was on his back foot the whole time. But just there, you could see he was pushing it. Oh yeah, you haven't been. It's like, yeah, dude, but please, can you please address one or any of Smith's points? But
Well, I guess Murray's a supporter of the Iraq War too. Back in the day, it seems.
yeah, that's the if you want to gauge Douglas Murray's prescience or expertise, why his track record is right there, available for anyone to look up.
Well, I guess if you did want to like credential yourself as an expert on the Gaza situation, I guess it would make sense to have gone there. But you definitely don't have to be there to opine on the matter. And then it's ultimately like a question of like what the facts are and what you have to say. So I guess it would be more qualifying to have gone. But to say that Murray's an expert because he's been there, it's kind of weak. But I guess he kind of has a point. I guess I can see why you're saying he sort of landed a punch here.
It's the best punch Murray landed the whole 3 hours. So when we were growing up, one of our old man's perennial phrases, he was one of his like things he would always say was, "It's always easier to run someone else's life." Do you remember ever hearing that? Yeah. So what he's saying there, what's encapsulated in that turn of phrase, is this idea that sometimes objectivity is a huge handicap. Like when you're too close to something, it's really hard to be subjective about it. And so all I'm saying is, in some ways, it's easier to be objective and to get analysis correct when you're not ensconced in a situation, when you're not there on the front. So being there, I can see where that would be beneficial to forming opinions about an international geopolitical conflict. But I can also see where it would be a liability. Just further underscoring the vacuousness of our man Murray's point here.
Well, Crystal was making the point on Breaking Points, who, of course, is like a bleeding heart supporter of the Palestinians, that like going to like the access points or the crossings into Gaza, like under like having the Israeli government bring you there is kind of different than being like a Palestinian and needing medical care and whatnot and needing to get across the border. All right, should we go to the next clip?
Yes, indeed. So the next clip, we're now going to pivot into this idea of anti-Semitism. So buckle up, people. Here we go with clip numero 3.
To attribute American foreign policy in the last 40 years to Paul Wolfowitz and Dick Pearl is, knowingly or otherwise, to encourage a conspiracy that has very obvious legs. And I just urge you not to do it.
Okay, let me respond to this a little bit. First of all, it is not at all saying that these guys therefore just control everything. I'm just pointing out what a 4-star general claimed, where plans originated, and that they ended up being implemented. That doesn't mean that they were the absolute ruler or arbiter of what was going to happen. But again, I got to say, for you to say that I can't bring up the neoconservatives,
I never said you couldn't. I just laughed.
Let me just right. But the implication is that I'm unwittingly giving fertile ground to some like Jew-hating conspiracy if I bring up a guy who's got a Jewish last name who was a consequential person in our government. This is like identical to the arguments of the woke left. That would just be like, oh, if you even say something, if you bring up the crime rate in Chicago, you're basically a bigot because other people could take this and run with it.
Come on.
No, you come on. What's the argument?
Look, if you said to me,
I said a 4-star general said something, and there's no. What's the response?
If you said to me, or somebody said to me, don't you think that some people are running the global financial system? And I said possibly, and I said, who do you think it is? And they said, the Rothschilds. I think I'd be right in saying there was something a bit off about the character of the person doing that, because it seemed like they were playing to some kind of lazy old trope.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say there's something a bit off about the character of Douglas Murray, because I believe that the story of the Rothschilds is part and parcel of understanding how we came to have a invisible superstructure of power over and above our nominal heads of state. Everyone knows that exists. Everyone knows Elon Musk is not the richest man in the world, and that there's Bilderbergs and all of these the people who have the real wealth, the real wealth of the Protestant Reformation, places like London and Geneva, right, where this wealth is concentrated. These old families, again, it's like we have a. If you just look at the coordinated response to COVID across government, you get the same, it's like the Prime Minister of Australia, Prime Minister of the UK, President of the United States, Prime Minister of Canada, Prime Minister of New Zealand, all working in concert, all coming out with the same phrases, build back better, all getting their marching orders from somewhere, from something, right? Or you have WikiLeaks leaking that Citibank gets to approve Barack Obama's cabinet, right? We live in a situation where Citibank is approving our presidential cabinet positions. Noticing that, right? And again, notice this has nothing whatsoever to do with Judaism. There is no, other than an old racist or an old medieval trope to which Douglas Murray is talking about. Noticing this has nothing whatsoever to do with Judaism. The problem, again, fractional reserve banking, compound interest. This is what's killing us. And it's obvious that, and again, just as the Pope crowned the kings and queens of Christendom during the Middle Ages, right? As soon as the Pope's international influence gets canceled by the Treaty of Westphalen in 1649, it's 1692, and you get the first central bank, and now you have this strange financial power behind all the thrones of the throne of England, and then more and more. The Rothschilds were critical in spreading these central banks from European country to European country. It's not, everyone knows, right? It's not hard. Everyone knows about the Trilateral Commission, or the Council on Foreign Relations, or the Bilderberg Group. I mean, these are extremely, they're just not that hard to look at. They actually do exist. The puppet masters of international geopolitics has been financed since the late part of the 17th century. Now, just to give a little background there, Murray was talking about Muammar Gaddafi and the justifications for the invasion of Libya and the destruction of Muammar Gaddafi's regime there, and talking about it as if it was something that had just organically come about as the right thing to do in 2011. But then Smith brings up that famous interview with General Wesley Clark on Amy Goodman's Democracy Now!, where he talks about these plans to invade 7 countries that that 4-star General Wesley Clark claims to have seen in 2001 before we went to Iraq. Right, there was some staffer was disturbed that apparently we're going to war with Iraq, and Wesley Clark saw that there was like a list of 7 countries that were going to be invaded. Right, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya. And those are all of those countries except for Iran is the last one. You referenced at the top of the pod, Brian, the lamentable possibility of war with Iran, and it is ominous that they're the last country on this list of 6 or 7 countries that we have not destroyed yet. Smith's point was simply that clearly America had it in for Muammar Gaddafi long before 2011, as evidenced by the testimony of this 4-star general. And because one of the people involved is Deputy Defense Secretary Paul Wolfowitz, that's what sent Douglas Murray into this thing talking about, you shouldn't mention Wolfowitz's name. You're going to give credence to like anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, right? That is a crazy response to what Dave Smith is saying. It makes me wonder why would you go right to anti-Semitism when Smith is just talking about the testimony of this 4-star general? It makes it seem like Douglas Murray is carrying water for the regime. It makes me wonder what strange parties Douglas Murray has been to in his free time, because we all know that like strange, like the Jeffrey Epstein world, like that like the intelligence communities use blackmail and use political leverage to control people. So the fact that he would go to anti-Semitism just because Smith referenced the testimony of General Clark is like, why are you carrying water? Like, it makes me think that he's compromised and has some other ulterior motive here. Don't know for sure that that's true, but it's so odd. Anyway, Brian, what was your reaction to that troubling clip?
Yeah, I just think it doesn't really land. Or man, just the business at the end of the Napoleonic Wars there, and in Rothschild, having his couriers say that the British had lost, and so they brought up all the stocks. I don't know. It would be easier if Dave Smith wasn't Jewish himself. To maybe I don't know. You could listen to Joe Rogan and it's not and try to brand his podcast as some Jew hating podcast. It's that is just really far removed.
You would have to have an ulterior motive, in my view.
But I mean, I guess to be fair to Dave Smith is that in conspiracy circles, things quickly take a turn for the Jew hating. So, I mean, I guess there's something to be said about that. It's hard to take Jew hating as they just don't do that on the podcast. It's a tough argument to try to land, I guess. And
if you wanted to have less Jew hating in the world, then maybe having everyone's TikTok blowing up with photos of the atrocities in Gaza, that might be a good way to not promote anti-Semitism. I've heard this point made 1,000 times from 1,000 different people, but yeah, that's going to make people start to. Telling anyone that criticizes the policy of a specific party within the Israeli government that they're responding to that with claims of anti-Semitism, right? It's like. We're really making it so that you can't even call out actual anti-Semitism if and when you were ever to encounter it, because it's just you just call wolf so many times that it's just become meaningless. Like calling people Hitler. It's just been happening so much that it's it doesn't really hold the same punch it once did.
I guess what it is that there's this knot going on, if you say the Jews are so not in control that if you say the Jews are in control, then you get that you get branded as an anti-Semite, I guess. Although I'm not trying to say the Jews are in control in the first place.
The banking houses are in control.
I guess it's, to put it in a way that sounds less shocking, maybe it's just if you criticize Israel, you get branded as an anti-Semite. That's the move that politically happens on the internet and I guess on these podcasts or what have you. And I don't know. That's a completely crazy state of affairs, right?
It used to work really well to shut people down, but now people know we've rung the anti-Semitism bill too many times. It's
But to approach the issue from the other side, I guess there is something about anti-Semitism where we start imagining these hook-nosed Jews running everything, and I guess people are prone to anti-Semitism in some ways. I mean, it is a problem where people start rounding up the Jews. I mean, it's been known to happen, right? So there's a valid concern there. So I don't want to underplay that. But But I don't know, like, just you're not allowed to bring up the name Rothschild, though. Like, it's kind of weird. Or I don't know. It's not weird. It's just I don't like. I just don't understand Murray's like worldview. I guess like he doesn't. He thinks like a neoliberal order is like what's best for us. I guess or.
Who knows?
I just don't understand his worldview, and I just wonder. Like, I want to talk to like Douglas Murray and Sam Harris. I want someone to really hold their feet to their fire about like what do they think about the petrodollar. I guess is what it comes down to. Yep.
Well, let's roll the last clip. We'll hear the last bit about anti-Semitism from Messrs. Smith and Murray, and then we'll bring it on home. Eh, Brian?
And I think similarly that if you give the implication that a cabal of people, particularly, and you should be really careful about this because of the people who will come up underneath you, if you give the implication that these cabals exist and you decide to elevate the Jews or people with Jewish names in it and then play down the non-Jews, I can tell you, you will be opening up a world of madness.
But am I really playing down the non-Jews? I mean, go look at the stuff that I've said about Obama, about George W. Bush.
You said Middle East policy is Dick Pearl and Paul Wolfowitz, and I said,
no. I mean, this is why I'm saying this is a woke leftist tactic. I literally just mentioned that a 4-star general said this. I'm quoting him, and now you're telling me that this is the same thing as promoting.
Don't pretend to me that when you quote somebody, it's a totally arbitrary thing that you just pluck out of the air. You decided
I'm not arguing that it's arbitrary. I'm saying I'm using the quote for a reason. I was connecting it to an argument.
And I'm saying to you,
I'm giving fertile ground to Jew haters to mention it.
I think that when you decide to elevate what is a conspiracy of people who are overthrowing the governments of various countries, some of which haven't been overthrown and others of which have, but by the way, were not overthrown by American dominance, certainly not in Syria. And then you say that the people who are doing it are these people with Jewish names. I think you should be more judicious than that, because you probably know what bubbles up underneath you online by now.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's no question that there are, no matter what, and by the way, it's funny just hearing you say this to me. I mean, look, and by the way, I completely agree with you. I think you've been one of the best champions on opposing Europe's insane immigration policy. I also think the United States of America's had an insane immigration policy. I'm happy to see that that seems to be being reversed. But imagine you made a point about immigration, and I were to say to you, be careful what's bubbling up online, because now look, the fact is, if you are taking a position that opposes, say, Muslim immigration into the UK, then yes, it is quite possible that a lot of people who really just hate Muslims are going to end up liking what you had to say or following you. But that doesn't mean you're responsible to it. And if I were to say that to you, you would be the first to very eloquently point out that that is a complete non-argument. The question is this policy good or is it bad? And whether there's not, and if you want to say to me, hey, I should disclaim when I make this point that hey, I'm Jewish, I love Jewish people. The fact that there were some Jewish people involved in our foreign policy establishment does not mean that it's the Jews. Then fine, I'm happy to say that. But I just think it's a non-argument to say that you're kind of you're creating fertile ground for this hatred. If I'm being completely honest, I think we've seen what you're talking about bubbling up on Twitter. Do you think that's gotten worse over the last 18 months?
Yeah, sure.
Right. I think kind of what Israel's doing in this war and the U.S. funding and arming it have been something that is really a great facilitator for that stuff to bubble up.
As I say, we could go back to that, but I disagree. I think that Israel has every right to go in and destroy the terrorist group that carried out the massacres.
Yes, but again, no one's arguing that they have the right to destroy the terrorists. The question is they have the right to kill innocent people.
Around again, which I think we've done.
We're just not answering what I'm saying.
I think I've already answered that, but just to go back to the meat of that.
Yeah, Murray answered nothing, dealt with the arguments not at all. It was a piss poor performance. That is I think Murray did serious damage to his reputation as a public intellectual with this abominable interview. Hearing Smith over the last year and change, year and a half, or since October 7th, giving a better account of what's going on in Palestine and Israel than anyone else. all that time I thought, well, I wonder what would be Douglas Murray's. He's erudite, he'll be able to give a good accounting of the other side. And I thought, well, Murray's just in a different stratosphere than Dave Smith. Will never hear it. And I just can't believe that Douglas Murray arrived not only with nothing, not only with a completely empty Santa sack with not a single present in it, that he was like uncouth and rude and talking down and condescending to Smith and groaning and moaning and gasping and, smacking his lips the whole podcast. It's like, dang, I just really thought that he might have something. But the whole podcast, there was a lot of going round and round and round about, should we only talk to experts? Well, no, it's perfectly fine to talk to non-experts. Okay, so can we talk? No, because you're not an expert. It just that loop over and over and over again. So anyhow, I've heard a lot of this interview the past couple of days. And I really admired Douglas Murray before, but he's like Sam Harris. Compromised is my final conclusion here. I'll have to get a big rubber stamp that says compromise and stamp it over Douglas Murray's photo. And go ahead, Brian.
Well, the first 40 minutes of the podcast was Douglas Murray asking Joe Rogan why he doesn't have more experts on, basically with establishment opinions. And he basically did not go on to support the experts' case, I guess. And so, I guess I think of this podcast as like a boxing title fight, like 10 rounds. And, maybe Murray got a couple jabs in on Dave Smith, but Murray mostly got clobbered and was in like a heat by the end.
Yeah, it's absolutely brutal.
Although the actual nature of the podcast is, tensions were kind of high. Towards the end, though, they didn't seem so far apart. I don't really know how it goes forward from here. Like, I would like to hear Sam Harris's reaction to this and see if he felt like the establishment. I guess that's probably what he'll do at some point or something, is say that Murray prevailed somehow.
Well, we'll see. I'll be very curious to see if Sam can somehow spin this thing into a reasonable performance from Murray, because the man didn't touch the arguments at all the whole time. Nothing. It's just like he exhausted. I've already answered that. No, you didn't, dude. You didn't talk about it the whole podcast. Painful for me, because these are people I used to look up to intellectually, like Sam Harris. He got me with the atheism thing in like 03, 04. Then he got me with the lying thing. How it's just easier to just, rather than trying to remember what you told everyone, just index. No matter how shameful it is, just admit it. Just never lied. It's never expedient. It's always hard to write. So it's just easier just to be brutally honest and go from there. And he got me again with his meditation school. The meditation course was awesome. I really learned a lot about meditation from Dr. Harris. But man, I think these guys, I think they're somehow compromised. I think the regime has got something on them.
Well, what's crazy, to go back to the Sam Harris clip we played at the top, it's not just that he said he disagreed with Dave Smith. He called him a fraudster.
Yeah, a trafficker and misinformation or something like that. Yeah.
So I guess I'd like to think that we've established in our hour-long segment on this that calling Dave Smith a fraudster is pretty darn weak. And so I feel like I got lost in the weeds a bit on the Rothschild business. But, we need to, focus on, the petrodollar and what's going on with banking and, things of that nature. And, yeah.
Yeah, yes. The fractional reserve system, the Federal Reserve System are being used to systematically drain the coffers of the poor in the working class and the middle class, and awarding that money systematically to the already wealthy. We can either we need a new system, but again, taxing the wealthy and repatriating the money back to the poor, where it can then be spent and go back to the bank accounts of the wealthy, is the only way to extend the runway. There is no other solution. But the history of how we find ourselves in a place where the banks play the role that the popes once played in international geopolitics, I think is very interesting, very much to the fore. And though there is no understanding the current geopolitical reality without understanding these weird, secretive organizations that run our banks. Again, that has nothing whatsoever to do with Judaism. Nothing at all. Other than some medieval racist tropes that Murray mentioned there.
Yeah, I think I'm just not gonna get caught up in this Semitism versus anti-Semitism debate.
Yeah, we really got to focus on compound interest and fractional reserve lending as the trap. That's the target over which we got to fly our bombers, and not be diverted by this flack from Mr. Douglas Murray, bachelor's degree in English.
All right.
Well, alrighty, folks, this is usually the moment in the System Failure podcast where I exhort you all to head over to systemfailure.org. There, you can read my weekly essays, which cover a lot of this financial history. You can also enter in your email address to receive those essays directly in your email inbox. That way, you'll never have to worry about missing one. And more to the fore, you can get in contact with Brian or me and admonish us for our rampant anti-Semitism by sending us an email you can just get online. You can just go to systemfailure.org, click on our names, and send us a note there. Much easier than email. Alrighty, good folks. We will see you all next week on the next exciting episode of the System Failure Podcast.
Alrighty.